last one of the season, and we've had a heck of a season, haven't we?
That's right. It's been incredible how fast it's flown by, but interesting times. And I think our program this year was really very timely in a lot of ways.
I can't think of a better way just to cap off what has been just a stellar year.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Atlanta Economic Club's May webinar. Very excited about today's speaker, who's going to touch on regional economic trends in the current environment. I know we've spent the past few months digging into some of the national trends in housing and inflation and some of the other topics. We wanted to take some time to go over how our area compares with the rest of the country and sort of what to expect over the next several quarters. As a reminder to everybody, we are fundamentally the Atlanta Economics Club, and there are definite interests in the Southeast region and Atlanta in particular. So curious to hear what Dr. Treyz has to say. For those of you that have been to our events before, welcome back. For the first time attendees, hope you enjoy our webinar today, of course. This is our final program of the 2021-22 program season. I just wanted to say a really quick thank you and shout out to our Vice President, Mike Scordellis, who did a really tremendous job coordinating this year's program, and the rest of the board, just making sure that we had speakers every month that were timely and able to tackle some of these more difficult topics. We'll be on hiatus for the next few months over the summer. We look forward to reconvening in September with a fresh slate of events. I mentioned this last month, but the board and I are currently looking at resuming in-person meetings next year. We've been virtual essentially since the pandemic began. We don't have all the details figured out as far as where we're going to be and how it's going to look like, but we are optimistic that we'll be able to sort of begin some version of in-person events starting in the fall. As has always been the case, we'll be closely monitoring COVID cases and any other kind of restrictions, and we'll react appropriately as those conditions change. As a quick reminder, please put all of your questions that you may have during today's session in the Q&A section. We'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes or so at the end for some questions. I know today's speaker has quite a bit to cover, so I'll just give a quick introduction before we dive in. Today's speaker is Dr. Treyz, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Economist at Regional Economic Models Incorporated, who is a leading provider of dynamic economic and demographic modeling software and consulting. He's an authority on analyzing public policies and their regional macroeconomic and population impacts. Under Dr. Treyz's leadership, REMI has shaped public policy debates by helping clients evaluate economic development, transportation, energy, immigration, reform, and other topics. The company's clients include federal, state, and regional agencies, metropolitan planning organizations, leading national associations, universities, consultants, just anybody that has an interest in analyzing public policy and the impacts on economic conditions. Dr. Treyz has overseen the research and development of REMI's suite of regional policy models. He has academic publications in leading journals. He holds an AB in economics from Princeton University and a PhD in regional science from the University of Pennsylvania. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Treyz. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim, and thank you for the kind introduction. The presentation today is going to pivot a little bit from the immediate economic outlook and inflation to sort of more of the structural relationship between transportation development and inclusive and sustainable economic growth. So really it fits in very well with the concern about inflation, which has been affecting lower income people. Of course, inflation affects everyone, but it's been particularly burdensome to lower income folks, lower educational attainment, Black and Hispanic groups, and women who have come out of disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and then coming in where with the inflation, even though it's broad-based, it impacts everybody, is like lower income. These groups haven't had the same benefits of the capital appreciation in the stock market and housing market that's been benefited higher income, higher wealth people to begin with, and also they're unable to lower income households are unable to reduce discretionary spending. It's not like it's just cancel the vacation or move back from the brand name to the store name, but it's a choice of choosing between necessities. So the NABE conference this spring, the policy conference in DC, was looking at policy options for sustainable and inclusive growth. From the Fed perspective, and what Jay Powell is doing is it's very difficult for monetary policy to impact things at this granular level where we're looking at inclusive economic growth. But the work going on in Georgia in terms of urban planning, the Department of Transportation, the Atlanta Regional Commission is really looking at what is the future hold in terms of having economic growth that really matches the workforce and the labor force to where the job opportunities are available, and also having affordable and reliable transportation options for all stakeholders in the economy to be able to have access to where their jobs are located. Households now are spending about $5,000 a year on gasoline. This is up significantly from last year, and that's just a small share of vehicle ownership. So if we're having a vision for how Georgia's going to grow, how Atlanta is going to develop, I think it's very significant to understand that these are public policy decisions, and you want to be sure that the public benefits from these decisions. So that means we want to look at all stakeholders in the economy and particular stakeholder groups. So that's along income level, educational level, racial and ethnic categories, and by gender. So in this presentation, I'm kind of getting to the sort of some of the broader policy issues, getting away from, and I think now I'm sharing a screen, which is this presentation. I'm going to be going through a study, a white paper that we did jointly with KPMG on measuring the economic equity and environmental contributions of transportation infrastructure. So this study was focused on the DC area, and I think DC has a lot in common. The DC metro area has a lot in common with the Atlanta metro area. Both are major world-class cities encompassing a large geography. But then within these regions, although the regions on aggregate are very diverse regions, they still have quite a bit of segregation by de facto segregation by neighborhood. So there's still are very large disparities from one neighborhood compared to other neighborhoods, and then really sort of this issue of like, how do you have these large metro areas sort of act as an integrated whole, so that when we have economic growth and economic development, that those benefits are widespread. So in looking at, we did 3 different scenarios in this study, and there's a bus electrification, a fixed guideway transit, and improved bicycle infrastructure. And I'll focus mostly on the bus electrification, just for time constraint, not to go through each of these in detail. But the idea with electrification is to replace the bus fleet with electric buses, and this involves construction of charging stations and other aspects. There's a fixed guideway transit, so this is to improve the transit opportunities. The Purple Line project specifically, which again is about giving access to the jobs and improving bicycle infrastructure. So one thing in the area of transportation, we also often think of looking at inclusive economic growth. And we often think of that as, and it's probably like many different components need to work together, many different institutions, educational institutions, what firms are doing, but transportation is a very important aspect of that. So if we want to have inclusive, broad-based economic growth, we need to have the workforce training, the education, the development to make that a reality. We also need to have private firms and governmental agencies looking to develop a more diverse workforce. But transportation is very critical as well, because and the way that cities have grown up with various zoning laws and various developments of transportation, you find in Atlanta as well, in DC, that oftentimes there are jobs located out in the suburbs, which may be predominantly white. They may have very exclusionary zoning, high housing costs, and then, but then there's a large labor force located in other parts of the city, which is which may be higher proportion Black or Hispanic, and you need to be able to. The Human Resources Department out at the suburbs can't necessarily make it happen to have a more inclusive workforce unless the transportation system is there. So there are affordable, reliable ways to get to those jobs. And that's, I think the focus on that is the guideway transit and bus electrification, expanding the public transportation alternatives. So the study approach is to look at the background research, the macroeconomic contributions, the equity contributions of transit, and then particularly we want to show the effect on regional disparities, the workforce development benefits, and environmental contributions. So again, I'm going to focus mostly on bus electrification. We're looking at 2022 to 2031. We made just this simplifying assumption that it's entirely paid for with federal funding. So we've made it easy to get positive economic results because the work is being funded federally by assumption. Now, I think it's a really good way to illustrate how economic modeling can help evaluate these these policies, and also evaluate what effect it has on economic disparity. So it's a really good illustrative example. Now, when you get down to real world policy, there's going to be a state match or a metropolitan match for the federal funding. And then it's important to be able to look at other aspects like finance and so forth. And the economic analysis comes into play to really support that the state or the metro area getting involved in the projects helped along with the federal funding. Of course, we're coming out of the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, so that gives this is an excellent opportunity for transportation agencies to be involved in looking at making investments, which really we expect to last the next 30 years. So it's a really critical time for making these choices and these decisions. So the modeling inputs, again, I'm on the left column on bus electrification, is looking at vehicle and charging facility, construction. There will be operation and maintenance expenditures, because once the electric vehicles are in place, there are lower operating costs, less consumption of fossil fuel, less maintenance costs. And if we're looking in the context of a regional economy like Atlanta, oil and gas are imported from the region. So if there's a way to be more efficient within the economy, that's a net savings for the city. And then the environmental aspects of these are important as well. Electrification means less local emissions, SOx and NOx, and then lower carbon. And the guideway transit is looking at extending a transit line, and bicycle infrastructure is a way to improve quality of life for the region, and also to reduce emissions and transportation costs. So the context we're looking at is the REMI model. So this is what we do, is modeling national, state, local economies down to the county level, so we can build the complete representation of the economy of the county. And you can also have a multi-regional model where, let's say, a state is broken into 5 different regions, and then each of those regions is operating as its own independent economy, but also with significant transactions with other economies, trade flows, commuting flows, spillovers, and feedbacks from other economies. So the basic model structure has an output and demand block. So that's like GDP, C plus I plus G plus net exports, a complete demographics block, which is cohorts for 4 different racial demographic groups, 101 age cohorts, and then 2 genders. So that's 808 cohorts with death rates and birth rates and survival rates. Migration based on economic factors, to be able to see where the population and labor supply is going for your region. Labor capital demand, which then supply interacts with demand to determine wages, compensation rate, and then other prices, housing prices, and then the market share is the ability of the region to sell within or outside of the economy. So it's a simultaneous equation model. It's a dynamic model. So therefore, if we're looking at transportation and we say we reduce transportation access costs between one location and another, that has benefits to sort of improve the productivity, because you can hire from a larger labor pool and have workers who are good fits for the job. And so transportation is also fundamental for making a metropolitan economy very productive. And we find cities and metro areas are productive by bringing people together, connecting people, having access to different firms and a large skilled workforce. Then if we're looking at a policy simulation, we have on the right-hand side, you have inputs for policy variables. So project-specific data, construction operations, fuel demand. We have something called your amenities, labor access. And then from a transportation model, you drive the change in travel time, effective distance out of a travel demand model or other indicators of the use and the accessibility improvements that you have from development. Now, so in the dynamic context, we see, for example, like this, if we're looking at a change like there'll be a change in participation rates that's being driven by employment opportunities. Then the output of the model we have over here on the right-hand side, a little box that says economic and demographic results. And that's kind of the main thing that policy is looking at is what's GDP, what are the job growth by industry, what's the change in wage rates. Now, typically economic analysis looks at this as just being an aggregate. What's the top line here? How much economic growth has there been? What's the total personal income for the economy? However, these are public policy decisions, and all that economic growth, the top line number could look terrific because GDP increases, incomes increase, but that could all be concentrated in a very small proportion of the population. So when we're looking at public policy, we want to see, is this inclusive economic growth? Are the benefits of economic growth broad-based? So then looking at these aspects about disparities are very important. Are there jobs created for all of the demographic groups by race and by gender? Are there jobs for those with a high school education as the top level of attainment, a master's? At what are there jobs that match the educational level of all groups within the region? We can also look at regional disparities. How do policies? So in the case of Georgia, we can look at not only the state as a whole, but also down to the county level to be sure that policies are beneficial not only to the metro areas, but also Georgia as a whole. So being able to look at regional disparities by, let's say, urban versus rural counties. And then also income by quintile. So if we look at 5 different quintiles of income, we can evaluate then, are these policies benefiting all these different groups? So in the bus electrification, we see here the main thing, the top line numbers. It looks very good. An increase in jobs, an increase in regional product, increase in disposable income. And but then we want to go beyond this, and this is using the REMI Transite model, and then it has a specific module called REMI SEI, so REMI's socioeconomic indicators, which look at the effect on disparities within the economy. So from the viewpoint of broad-based economic growth, we have moving from the left to the right, we have a lot of the growth and jobs from this, specifically from the construction of the charging stations and those jobs and the not only those direct jobs, but the indirect jobs created by the respending, direct, indirect, and induced spending for the economy, develops jobs in the most during the construction phase. If we see from the right-hand side of changes in compensation by income quintile, is that the second 20% income quintile, so the middle class, lower middle class income quintile, sees a lot of those jobs benefits. So this is the kind of policy we should be able to look at things that not only benefit that like top 20%, but then very broadly. Over half of the employment gains are by non-white groups. So the job creation benefits are being widely shared across races, and ethnicities. On the lower left, change in participation rates increases. And then on the lower right-hand side, we see the change in the labor force and unemployment rate. So this chart on the left-hand side shows the change in the labor force. So because of the additional jobs and the additional employment opportunities and higher wage rates, that causes the labor force to grow by 200 in 2022, and then it goes up to over 1,000 increased people entering the labor force due to these improved economic conditions. The unemployment rate goes down. So you have an expanded labor force, but because of the additional employment demand, the unemployment rate goes down. And then on the lower right-hand side, we can look at additional jobs by educational attainment. So, so we see that there's job creation across the education spectrum, so we're looking at the highest level of educational attainment. Starting from the top of the block is doctoral or professional degree, then master's, then bachelor's, then associates, some college, no degree, high school diploma or equivalent, and less than high school diploma. So we see that really the lion's share of the jobs are for those with some college and no degree, or high school diploma or less than high school diploma. So this is sort of a major challenge for job creation, is to be able to support the jobs for the educational levels that we have in the economy. And then we're also looking at CO2 emissions avoided. So moving to its electrification then reduces CO2 emissions. So we have there are a couple of other examples, the fixed guideway transit, and I'm just going to go through some of these key results. Again, we're looking at the income effects by income quintiles, employment by race and ethnicity, change in participation rates. So again, we see that this has this policy has broad-based benefits, and when we're looking at extensions of transit, and you know, it wouldn't just be transit, it also means roadways and relieving congestion. It's all about connecting the workforce to where the jobs are located. So one of the strengths of the Atlanta area is such a diverse workforce, and to build on that, it's important to be able to there's that affordable, reliable transportation that connects the workforce location to where their jobs are located, so that transportation improvements, whether they're transit or whether they're relieving roadway congestion, can help connect the jobs to the people. Not everybody can work remote from their office or home. Okay, and then their emission reductions benefits. Again, we see the educational attainment. I'll just make a note with the bicycle infrastructure. We can see that, like, this is a way to save money to commute by bike, but it also represents a quality of life improvement for the region. And I'll just sort of comment on a way that we're trying to quantify the economic benefits of quality of life improvements, and they're significant developments of the ring in Atlanta, and parks and public public recreational benefits and bicycle infrastructure goes along with this, to have bike trails, to have bicycle options built into city planning and regional planning. So the way that we're looking at is the economics is that people make their locational decisions about taking a job based on sort of economic factors. What's the wage? What are the employment opportunities? But also we find in looking at around the country is that the sort of intangible quality of life benefits are also very important for labor force attraction and labor force development. And typically we think of regions as sort of being high amenity as, you know, in the, or is it more sunny days, a warmer climate, low humidity, and the public parks, the access to recreational resources such as the ocean, mountains, and then so by the development of bike paths and parks, we model that as sort of a non-pecuniary benefit of living within a region. So in wage equivalent terms, is somebody might be willing to accept, you know, a slightly lower real wage to work in an area that's a highly attractive area. So for a city like Atlanta, it's the major league sports, it's the recreational activities, restaurants, events, and then also sort of that quality of life related to can you get to, you know, can you get to work? What about these other things that are related to transportation? How do you get to work? What are the congestion costs of transportation? What is the convenience, air quality, and that sort of thing. So I don't think I need to go through all of these details, but again, the point is we can measure not only these like top level economic effects, but then we can get down to, like, you know, again, from the theme of the NABE conference, policy options for sustainable and inclusive growth. So I'll sort of jump right here to the conclusions. We've looked at these three different scenarios, shown not only sort of the economic benefits, but then also looked at environmental benefits and also the effect on disparities within the region. And we're happy to share more information about this. And at this point, I will turn off my sharing, and I'd like to again thank everybody for attending and taking the time for this presentation. I'd like to open up for questions.
Great, thanks so much. I just wanted to start with, I guess I'll start with some of the questions from the audience. I also have some of my own. One here is just, you know, a question is whether or not you've attempted to overlay the modeling that you've done with regions either in the U.S. or elsewhere that have actually adopted some of the activity that you're modeling and advocating here with electric buses or some of the other stuff that you're looking for, just to see how well the model has been performing and to validate the outcomes.
Well, for this kind of structural modeling, if we're looking at the total economic effects, often there's like so much noise within an economy. It's that to like pinpoint, like in Los Angeles, we've been involved in looking at a lot of environmental regulations and policies, and it's hard to pinpoint like one small regulation and measure that econometrically. We have gone back and sort of compared the forecast, our forecast compared to what actually happened. And we've reported the mean percent error on those, and we have a paper that shows that. And then other things like when Katrina hit New Orleans, there was using the REMI model, Sandia National Lab did an estimate of what would happen to the economy, and it came very, very close to what actually occurred. But I think kind of the difference is that for a lot of these policies, it's you know, adding a bikeway. Well, there's so much going on in the economy. It's going to be really hard to pick up econometrically the cause and effect relationship between that one small development and, let's say, the overall growth of the city. So we have a structural model, and then all of the equations are estimated econometrically. So if we're looking at what is the response of migration to changes in wage rates, that's based on looking at panel data for all 50 states over 20 years to get statistically robust estimates for the responses to these changes. So we kind of build the model based on those econometric estimates, and then that's how we know that if you have a certain shock in, let's say, access costs or production costs, how the economy will respond.
So just a question on my end, you know, expanding public transportation and implementing some of these policies is something that's been sort of a debate in the Atlanta area for quite a while now. Like expanding you know, the mass transit system that we have up into different counties, I think has been a proposal at least for the last decade or more. But every time it kind of comes up as part of as a policy option, there's often significant pushback. So I'm curious as to your take as to like where this pushback comes from. How do you go about sort of overcoming the pushback that comes to these kinds of policies, given the numerous proposed benefits that may be there, you know, on the back end of it?
Well, I think we're not going to solve those problems, you know, from here at REMI. But I think, you know, what this socioeconomic indicators that we have is we see as this is a way to sort of have a standard for looking at the effect of public policy on disparities. And, you know, you could call this data equity. You know, when we look at economic data and we look at economic policy and what effect it has on the macro economy, if we just look at total GDP, total employment, total personal income growth, then we're sort of ignoring that this is public policy. And there are a lot of voters, there are a lot of stakeholders. And if you just look at total personal income growth, well, that could be one person who gains all the income, and if the economic analysis is just looking at the aggregate indicators, then sort of we miss out on kind of, do we have equity in data? Are we looking at each individual in the economy as a stakeholder in policy? And when you start looking at that lens of evaluation, then it becomes, I would suggest we can have a much more inclusive way of looking at policies. And if the goal out of NABE is not just, I mean, NABE, you know, the NABE conferences, here's the title, but then everybody's talking about Fed policy. Well, the Fed can't do that much in terms of in terms of broad-based inclusive growth. So this is really why the decisions made at the state and metropolitan and city level are so important for reaching these objectives.
Sure. I mean, one of the more telling slides, I think, in there, one of the more telling pieces of the presentation is just talking about like the gains in jobs and how that gets distributed, and sort of how it's, you know, half of the job gains go to minorities and lower income and things of that nature. And I often wonder if there's just sort of a disconnect between the people that are voting on these policies that have the expansion going in their area versus where the job gains are actually going to accumulate, or where the benefits are going to be distributed from it. Definitely interesting stuff. So another question from the audience, just in terms of cost benefit analysis, like looking at the public cost of this kind of stuff per passenger mile of travel, is that data in your studies also?
Typically, well, I should say, yes, in Transite, kind of the first step is then to run through that cost benefit analysis. So we have kind of a complete cost benefit calculator, which is consistent with FHWA standards. So that will, the change in VMT and VHT will drive like the emissions changes, these other cost benefits. So that's kind of the first step for doing this analysis, is to FHA cost benefit. Then once you've found that, okay, the benefit cost ratio is over 1 or like higher over 1, now it's, you get into the sort of the next stage, which is looking at okay, cost benefits are great, but then how does that impact people's lives directly, which is where the economics comes into play. How does it affect incomes? How does it affect jobs? Where do the jobs go? So the answer is yes, that's part of kind of the full analysis.
So just another question from the audience. Are there any areas or cities that do a good job, in your opinion, of planning and zoning for higher paying job and bring education levels up to meet those needs?
Well, I'd say you look at major metro areas across the U.S. and it's really they're still, you know, most major metro areas still have really just a lot of sort of de facto differences between neighborhoods, and these are educational, racial. So in some ways, it's like so little has changed in the last 50 years. You know, what city has really knocked it out of the park? You know, I don't think any city would get an A+ in terms of sort of addressing some of these issues in inequality and in education, poverty rates, you know, sort of acting together as one cohesive whole. Now, I mean, of course, a lot of progress, of course, has been made in the last 50 years. You know, it's just much more needs to be done. So we feel that the way that we look at public policies, and to be able to really get into quantifying the impacts on different income quintiles, on different racial groups, on men and women, is that's sort of a step to, okay, let's look at this rationally. Let's look at the problems that these areas have, and, you know, kind of address these issues not just with rhetoric, but actually with quantified, well-formulated public policy.
So sort of another question I had as you spoke. I was wondering what your thoughts were on just the pandemic in general and how it plays a role in this kind of analysis. I mean, I suspect that a lot of the disparities get heightened in many ways because of the pandemic experience. I mean, the idea that there's only certain types of jobs that are suitable for working from home versus others that are not. And I also think that just sort of commuter riding patterns probably changed due to the pandemic and things of that nature. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on all of those kind of things.
Well, I looked at the recent release on survey on like who's been working from home because of the pandemic, and it's what is it like 5%, 9% is, it's like, sort of in here we are, the Atlanta Economics Club, and we kind of think that, everybody like works the way we do and can work from home and, can remote in, but it's really not that many jobs that have that capacity to work from home. So if we kind of think like, oh, transportation doesn't matter anymore because people work from home, it's like, that's not the case. If you're a PhD economist, maybe it is somewhat the case, or you have a lot more flexibility. I think what's particularly difficult in the pandemic is that we're, as a country, we're sort of way behind the curve in terms of having broad-based inclusive economic growth. We were behind the curve in 2019, and it's stepped back a lot since the pandemic. So education, and that's been there's been a lot of disparities in education for going remote, who has the technology to do that. Which households have the time to like supervise children doing remote learning instead of just, okay, here's the computer and I have to go off to work. And then the whole asset appreciation. So the asset appreciation has benefited those who held assets in 2019. But now the fight against inflation is kind of, or like inflation, then sort of like everybody has to pay the piper for sort of excessive liquidity. So I just say that the pandemic has really made the need to address these problems like even more urgent.
So connected to that, just mass transit in general has taken a pretty big hit because of the pandemic, right? Like at least during the worst of it, it's quite common that people just didn't feel safe riding in mass transit. And just your thoughts or comments on that sort of dynamic.
Well, during the heights of the pandemic, it almost seemed like nobody's going to take public transportation again. Everybody's going to work from home or something like that. And I think that's obviously not the case. Most people are working, in person. And the pandemic is, I wish it were completely over. Anyway, it's not, it's not, but people are getting back to, the way things are going. I think, that's sort of a very immediate need is how is the financial stability of these systems being supported through this transition, so that we see as a very necessary part. And it's not just transit in Atlanta; it's also like there's a lot of road congestion. So you really need a transit system to be able to alleviate some of that roadway congestion as well. So I think it's kind of an immediate crisis, and the transit agencies have been losing a lot of money. But I think it's pretty clear that the in-person work and the ability to connect the worker from where they live at home to where their job is really necessary. We're not all going to be zooming in from home.
That's right. I mean, in my industry, which is commercial real estate, that's the big focus on, is actually, getting people back into the office and more back into the regular flow of things, and sort of the different steps that companies are taking to kind of move away from working from home back to in-person kind of things. And I was driving to work the other day, and the congestion is certainly returning to the Atlanta area.
But I'll say too, with the it is sort of a finance challenge for transit, in that now you have these like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday jobs. So like in Chicago is like Monday ridership is way down, Friday ridership is way down. So they're only collecting revenues for like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But then, the workers need the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday availability.
That's right. It's it's definitely a noticeable sort of trend as the week plays out, as to when traffic's bad, when it's not, when the office is busy, when it isn't, and I'm sure it also plays out on the mass transit side. Just any kind of final thoughts on how we can sort of encourage more folks to use various forms of mass transit or ride sharing or things like that. I mean, congestion has long been a problem in the Atlanta area. Like, this is it far predates the pandemic, and again, it's beginning to return. So just any last thoughts on sort of how we can go about encouraging additional ridership?
Well, I think in the sort of in the current environment is we have this massive inflation problem, and a war in Ukraine, and on and on like that. So I would say is like, it's important to like keep perspective on like the larger picture, like not just the next quarter, the next 2 quarters. And I would say this is an opportunity for not only transit, but for all sorts of infrastructure development, roadways, repairing bridges and so forth. So I think the important thing is here's the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's federal funding out there available to make investments, which should be lasting for the next 30 years. And sort of, here's the opportunity for like, what direction, how's Atlanta going to go? And how's Georgia going to go into the future? So I suppose you could get gift bags out if somebody takes transit, but I guess my perspective would be like, okay, here's an opportunity. What do we want? What do we want the future to look like? And to be able to make very balanced and informed decisions on important investments.
Well, we're getting up to the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I wanted to just say thank you to Dr. Treyz again for walking us through sort of the different parts of the model and the output there. Again, this is our last meeting for the season. We'll kick back off in September. I'm looking forward to reconvening with everybody. The board and I will be getting together over the summer just to talk about sort of what in-person meetings might look like going forward, and also to work on just like the next slate of guests and speakers for us. So with that, just close this out. Again, thank you again, Dr. Treyz, and I'll see you guys all in the fall.
Thank you so much.